What I wanted to start out by saying, and again, John did such a lovely job of describing the water that we're drowning in, and I'm grateful that you all have that in front of you now, the sheet to be able to reference. But I just wanted to talk about our current Prime Minister. So this guy's daddy, and I can see by the shades of gray here, and I'm including myself in that, everyone here likely remembers this guy's father. And so we all likely remember that in 1982 he did what? Anyone? Did someone say destroyed the country? Oh, okay. Well, yes, amen to that. Anyway, but in 1982, he did what was known as patriating our Constitution, okay? And part of that was the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which most are familiar with. Does anyone know the very first words of the preamble to the Charter?
Whereas Canada is founded upon the principles of law and the supremacy of law.
That's pretty close. Pretty darn close. Whereas Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. It says so in the first words in the preamble. And Section 2, which describes fundamental freedoms, the very first one is, anyone? Freedom of religion and conscience. And it is unconscionable that this is now, I don't know, by my count, the second attack within a couple of years, but if we go back to 2019, at least the third attack that there has been on religion in this country under this Prime Minister and his enablers in all parties. So does anyone remember the Student Summer Jobs Program in 2019? The attestation case? There you go. So some churches, synagogues, mandars, gurdwaras, mosques, whatever, if you have students that were going to have positions, intern positions, whatever it was, they wanted the church, I'm going to use the word church here, but hopefully you can insert whatever you want, gurdwaras. They wanted them to bend the knee before the state and say that we are willing to do whatever it takes so that we can get your government money, which is really taxpayer money, which is why it should offend us doubly, right? So unfortunately, there were those who did, and they signed, probably against their conscience. Again, I've read the Bible. I don't see anywhere where it says that we're supposed to be doing that. By the way, I'd like to start right off the top by saying it also doesn't say anywhere in there that we're only supposed to be open just because we have charitable tax status. So what I read is that we preach the word in and out of season. And I would wholeheartedly do so myself, but I certainly hope that we have people who are going to be brave enough to do that, even if an idiotic measure like this does end up passing. So I'm going to have to come back for just a second because I wanted to clear up one thing that I noticed that John had said. He was talking about the dangers of these motions passing. These are not motions yet. These are recommendations from the Finance Committee. So the danger is this. There are recommendations that are being made currently, and they could get turned into a motion, which has no real force or effect, but it could get turned into a bill, and it would be a supply bill, meaning having to do with money. It would also be a confidence motion, but every party lined up against the Conservatives on this one. So there's a very serious danger. It's very real. But the bigger danger is we don't even need to have it become a bill. There are things called orders in council. And the CRA, there's great precedent for this. They don't need to have a separate law passed to amend the Tax Act. They can simply have an order in council. They've proven that they would do it before. They did it during the Emergencies Act, which was also illegally called, which also shut down the churches. And again, there was no one. My competition, in response to this meeting tonight, took out a series of ads to say that he spoke out in the legislature against shutting churches down. Simply not true. Understand, not true at all. After the threat had passed, then it was, oh, why are the churches still closed? That's awful. The point being, once public opinion has shifted because people like The provincial Conservatives, I'm still on the executive of the Provincial Conservative Party. I'm one of the reasons, ironically, that that guy is running against me. We made his seat unwinnable as a provincial leader. But the time to speak up is before political winds have shifted and what we call the Overton window, the range of acceptable topics that you can be discussing in polite conversation. You don't wait for that. You lead when you are in a position to, when you're an elected representative. And you speak out forcefully against what was deemed to be an unconstitutional calling, invocation of the Emergencies Act, right? So those are the first two, to my mind, the first two major ones. And then, of course, we have this. So again, the great danger here is that an order in council could happen anytime. So what have we done now? We've described essentially the water that we're drowning in, but there always has to be the life preserver. So what can we do about it is the question. The answer is you need to ensure you elect the right people. And by that, I don't mean vote for whomever happens to have the CPC after their name. The time to get involved in these contests is right now. When you're selecting who's going to be your candidate, who's going to have that CPC after their name. We used to have a joke here, and by the way, I forgot we also have someone here from Taco Van Popta's office. That's my former riding. Very pleased to have them here. But what we used to say in Mark Warwa's former riding is that you could run a bale of hay, slap it with the right sticker, and it's going to get elected there, right? So that's Langley, Aldergrove, and West Abbotsford. And the same thing goes for Abbotsford, South Langley, which is actually 60% of my old riding. I've lived in Langley for the past 28 years. But again, this new riding of Abbotsford South Langley is 60% of that old riding. But still, for Ed Fast riding of Abbotsford, same thing applies, right? You slap this right sticker on a bale of hay and it's going to get elected here. And that's why it's important, the caliber of the candidate that you elect here. Have someone who is going to speak up early and often when situations like this arise. Make sure that that person actually represents you and your interests, perhaps in composite, right, in one person. You will never likely have someone who encompasses every facet of the riding. But I'm doing my best. And I'll quickly revert to the rest of what I ordinarily talk on, just so you have a better understanding. There's a lot of familiar faces in the room, but for those who don't know, once again, I'm Steve Schafer. I've been doing this, like I say, for over a year, informally, but you know, I think it kicked off in February. There are 4 things that Pierre Poilievre has said that he's running on, and I won't get into all the minutiae of why it is that we're not allowed to go off topic. We're only allowed to talk about the things that the leader has talked about and that the party has taken a position on. Right? People will often ask, oh, well, can you talk about this? I can, as long as I'm very clear that it is my opinion and it is not necessarily party policy. A lot of people like to ask, okay, what specifically do you want to do in the riding? What are your priorities? Happy to talk about that all day long. But what I've been concentrating on for the past almost a year is the 4 main points that Pierre's been running on. I'm the only one who's been with Pierre's team since 2019, when he was originally looking at making a run. And what has he been talking about? I'm sure you've heard. I'm sure you've seen. Axe the tax, right? Oh, is everyone going to finish it off? Build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. And so, I'll start at the beginning. Axe the tax. What are we talking about? The carbon tax, right? I always put that in quotes because carbon sounds dirty, but we're not actually talking about taxing dirty coal, are we? We're talking about carbon dioxide. It's important to say dioxide because it's literally the air we breathe, and it sounds a lot crazier when you hear, oh, they want to tax the air we're breathing, right? So I've been against that ever since Mike DeYoung, Christy Clark, and the rest of the BC Liberals brought in the carbon tax on July 1st, 2008.
First one's in Canada.
The first one in North America, and they were very proud of it. And you need to understand, not Pierre, I've still got Pierre Trudeau on my mind. As a Calgarian, you'd understand why. But Justin didn't actually give us the carbon tax. He gave us a mandate that across Canada, all provinces have to adopt a carbon tax. But he didn't have to do anything in BC, because the BC Liberals already gave us the most punishing carbon tax in all of Canada, the first in North America. And if you go on to StatsCan, you will see a survey that was done earlier this year proving that it had the least effect on consumer behavior. So Andrew Scheer, someone was referencing his campaign earlier, that I was actually proud to be on, he was right. It was all economic pain for zero environmental gain. Even if you think that it would do anything, it didn't. So in 2010, the first time that we took over the BC Conservative Party, and then again, about 3 years ago now, that a group of us took over the BC Conservative Party again, for a variety of reasons, chief amongst which was to axe the tax. Pierre Poilievre, as it turns out, is a relative Johnny-come-lately when it comes to the axe the tax mantra. We started that in 2008, as loudly as we could as a provincial party that was derided at the time, right? But to his credit, Pierre Poilievre had no reason to be against the tax, because it wasn't until Justin mandated it that he needed to be against it. So, not just by saying I'm against it, but I've been proving through my actions, we have taken every measure that we can, including, again, some of my friends here from Langley who have gone to all of the conventions. We got rid of the statement in our policy book at the Ottawa Convention in 2011 to make sure that we were not going to put a price on carbon and that we weren't going to have any kind of a carbon tax introduced. So again, I will take a backseat to no one in leading on the issue of axing the hated carbon tax, which, by the way, once again is going to go up in April. If you think prices are bad now, it's going to get worse, guaranteed. So axe the tax, build the homes. This one I can't talk about quite as much as I'd like to be able to, because people in very important positions, I'm not allowed to use their names or their, I'll tell you what, I'll give you the title of someone who's no longer the president of the Canadian Home Builders Association, and I can't give you, unfortunately, the names of several of the builders. But I guarantee you, if you were to go and talk to many of the builders here in Abbotsford and in Langley, they would know who I am. One of them handed his policy book to Pierre Poilievre at the largest fundraiser in the history of the party. Was just held a couple of days ago at the Wall Centre. He did Pierre earlier in the night, or earlier in the day, had gone out to Surrey, to one of their sites. There's just one of the many companies who know that I know whereof I speak when we're talking about building the homes. I'm very proud that Pierre has taken the very responsible position of saying that he will tie federal funding to municipalities' ability to get out of the way and get homes built, to bring down the unnecessary charges that they're adding to homes that delay the builds and they make houses cost more. He's promised it over and over. I think it's a very responsible position. On the provincial side of things, we know very well that we need very serious ALR reform. We need to honestly gut the ALC and to begin again with people who actually know what they're doing. I know this isn't a federal matter, but it all is involved. Look, Pierre's already said he's going to sell off federal lands and turn them over so that we can build houses on them. We should be doing much the same on a provincial level. Now, I'm not talking about getting rid of some of the most fertile land there is in BC. I don't think that would be responsible, but we have to admit that our system is broken when we have non-arable lands in Delta that we won't allow out of the ALR and build homes on. We won't allow land swaps with the interior when we have a very robust supply chain here in BC that's still locally grown food. But even so, we have greenhouses all over. One of the great things about greenhouses is you can pop them up anywhere. I wrote the business plan for a company that's got them currently in the Middle East where they've got droughts going on. we certainly don't need to put them on the most fertile land in all of BC. They could be in a parking lot somewhere. We need reform there, right? We certainly also don't need multimillionaires squatting, essentially, on acres and acres and acres of ALR land doing absolutely no agricultural work whatsoever. I am the 6th generation of Schafers in this country. My son, who's here somewhere tonight, probably still drinking some pop, is the 7th generation. My father is the first one who left the farm at 16, but we were all farmers. We're proud farmers. We want to do agricultural work on agricultural land, don't we? Right? We don't need people who are exchanging a pot or a jar of honey and having that license conferred on them, the ALR status. So you've got people driving around in Mercedes-Benzes, burning purple, as we would say, on the farm, right? Marked gas. It's beyond the pale what we're doing. So all of that, unfortunately, I've got a business background, that only covers 1/2 of the equation, the law of supply and demand. And so all the supply measures that we have are tinkering around the edges unless we want to address demand, right? So what's the demand side of housing? Anyone? Well, but what's driving it? Thank you. Immigration. So everybody here knows it, but for far too long, conservatives have been way too afraid to say it. Why? We might get called racists. But wait a minute. We didn't talk about the color of people's skin. We didn't talk about what country they're coming from. And in economics, which I'm so pleased that Pierre Poilievre quotes chapter and verse, Chicago School of Economics, it's colorblind. The fact is, we have way too many people who have been coming over when we already have a housing shortage and a serious housing crisis here. So once again, Pierre has adopted an answer for the demand side of the equation, and once again, very responsibly, has tied immigration to our ability to absorb them. And that ability is going to be based on the number of units. We need to increase the housing stock, and that's exactly the metric he's going to be using. We need to have more houses built than people coming in, bottom line. And I support him fully. Let's axe the tax, build the homes. Fix the budget, fix the budget, right. I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan. He's one of my political heroes, you might say. And I would say that Pierre learned an awful lot from him as well. Pierre, by the way, is only about 4 years my junior. We went to the same high school together. So he also knew what it was like to grow up in Calgary during the worst parts of what Pierre Trudeau did to the oil and gas sector out there. So I'm fond of quoting Reagan because he was known as the great communicator. Just like John Redekop, he could describe the water that we're drowning in, but then he would also offer the life preserver, and he could tell you why it is that you need to grab that. And I appreciate that. Or as Brad Wall once said, conservatives are really good at the what, but they're really bad at the why. So we need to get way better at explaining the why behind our policies. So here it is in a nutshell. Reagan said, government doesn't tax for the money it needs. It always needs every cent it gets in taxes. So it's incumbent on us to shut off the tap and starve the government of money. Pierre's a little more eloquent about it. He wants to talk about a dollar for dollar replacement when it comes to it. I'm willing to say I'm happy to starve the government of money because it does nothing as economically as the private sector, as Reagan said, and he was right then and he's right now. So fixing the budget is a very, very simple solution, as it turns out. Every single person in this room has a family budget. Whether it's actually written out or it's in your heads, we know that we don't spend beyond our means. Everyone here has a credit card, and we all know that you can't ring it up in perpetuity. We all know that total debt matters. And even though the BC Liberals, just like every other socialist government around the world, wanted to start talking about debt to GDP ratios instead of total debt, as though, who cares? Yeah, we've got a massive debt, but look at our credit. We've still got tons of room, so let the good times roll. And the problem is, we haven't set ourselves up for any time that we ever experience any kind of economic crisis. And there's never been a crisis that liberals, socialists didn't love or didn't want to manufacture if there wasn't one, because it gives them a license, or so they believe, to spend money and buy votes. It is absolutely shocking that in Alberta, where we used to have a pretty large sub-sovereign, what would be called a sovereign wealth fund, it was called the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund, and there used to be north of $20 billion in there. That's wise stewardship of the natural resources that belong to the provinces, not the federal government, right? Norway, does anyone know what they have in their sovereign wealth fund? It's the largest one in the world. Any guesses? 1 trillion? It's not bad a guess. Anyone else? It's more than $1 trillion, by the way. Anyone? I just spoke with a Swede a couple of days ago, and he assured me my numbers were out of date. I thought it was 1.438 trillion. That's apparently a few years old. It is now $2 trillion. People like to talk about the Nordic model as though it's this, it's this panacea. It's not. It's socialist, it's awful. But one of the great things is post-secondary education over there actually is fully paid for. And you can do that kind of thing when you don't have debt and you have a massive sovereign wealth fund that pays dividends. That's what we should be doing. That's what we could be doing. Instead, what's the situation in Canada today? Our debt servicing costs are over $40 billion per year. As I've said before, we might as well make a giant $40 billion pile of cash and set fire to it every single year. Whatever your priorities are, your budget wish list for spending priorities, everyone has to admit that if you had an extra $40 billion per year, it could buy an awful lot of solar panels, windmills, pay for extra doctors, whatever. But we don't. And for no good reason. Other than we, as voters, don't hold the government to account and don't force them to live within their means like we have to. Right? So, another one. There is a myth floating about, again, my competition, who has said, on the record for years, that he balanced the budget while he was finance minister. Is that true in BC? Anyone know? No. It is 100% a lie. And if it isn't, he could take me to court. He's a lawyer after all. But he knows that it's true. From your perspective, if this is total time and this is total debt, our debt in BC did this. There's a Wikipedia page floating out there which talks about debt. But if you look at it closely, it says net debt. And it was created in, I believe, early April, maybe late March of last year, in direct response to what I've been talking about. Anyone who's ever owned a company is aware that there are two sides to a budget, operational and capital. On the capital side, budget was never balanced in BC, ever. Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the recent past. I shouldn't say ever. On the operational side, it was balanced once out of those 5 years. And it was done by selling off over $423 million of Crown assets. That's taxpayer-owned assets. ICBC, BC Hydro, they were raided so that shenanigans could be played. And through that and the Pacific Carbon Trust, a little bit of a shell game was played to make it appear one time that the books were balanced on the operational side of the budget, not the capital budget. Meanwhile, debt rose. So when it comes to fixing the budget, once again, we will lead. And I would submit I'm the strongest candidate there. And on the very final one, crime, right?
Crime.
Yes, stopping the crime. This one's very simple. We have 2 border crossings in this riding. Sorry, hopefully everyone's going to be able to get a good look at this sign later on. It's the best we can do with the riding boundaries. Anyway, inside Abbotsford South Langley, we have 2 major border crossings. And I have a friend who's very well placed with the CBSA, and he informs me reliably that we are over 150 full-time equivalents short-staffed at the border. Now, fortunately, I've been talking about this because I believe in leading on the issues for about a year now. I did a video down at the border to speak about exactly this. I am the former vice president of the Langley Rod and Gun Club. I am a registered firearms owner. I'm a restricted firearms owner. I have put hundreds and hundreds of people through their training that they all require if they're going to be shooting at the Langley Rod and Gun Club, including, and this is a little embarrassing, some of the former IDF soldiers that we have living in Langley. You'd be shocked how many there are. I feel safer just that they're in the neighborhood. But the point is, for me to have a restricted firearms license means that I have passed the strictest scrutiny in all of Canada. Why? Because every 24 hours, my name is run through the 2 national police databases, CPIC and Prime. Because if I've committed any crimes in the preceding 24 hours, my license and my guns and my ammo ought to be taken away, right? My credit report is run frequently. It's not every 24 hours, but very frequently. Why? Because if my credit rating ever takes a slight dip, I might be tempted to go rob a bank, right? So I am, one other thing. I've also relinquished some of my rights. Unless you're a restricted firearms owner, the police, when they show up to your house, have to have a warrant to come in. I've relinquished that right because they want to ensure that my firearms are properly stored as well as my ammo. And if it isn't, then yes, they've got a right and they should take them away. The point being, so I'm happy to have said, once again, that I've led on that. Those are the 4 main points that we've been talking about, that I've been talking about, and why I am the strongest person in this race, in this nomination contest, to take on those 4 main points. The video very briefly described who I am, and maybe I should have started at the beginning, but again, I didn't write any notes. I do come from Calgary. My undergrad work is in microbiology, and I went back for grad school in business. I've run plenty of businesses in my time and now work as a management consultant. I've worked with many companies in Langley, obviously, but Abbotsford as well, especially during COVID. I know whereof I speak as far as business goes, and I've been involved with the Federal Conservative Party. If you look at your membership number, mine has about 2 or 3 fewer digits on it. That's how long I've been involved here. I've been involved in the federal party for just over 35 years now. And I've been involved again with the provincial Conservatives since about 2010, off and on. I've been on the board in Langley, Aldergrove. I don't think it was quite, was it 18 years? It's something like that. And this feels very weird for me. This is the first year that I haven't been on a board. We're not allowed to be on the board here while we're running as contestants. But I'm hopeful that I'll be able to rejoin Abbotsford South Langley soon. Anyway, what is the point of all of this? The point is, if you're interested, if anything that I've said has resonated with you tonight, we don't have much time left in this contest, and we desperately need, I'm talking about our campaign team, more people to sign up as members. Only the Federal Conservative Party are allowed to vote in the upcoming nomination contest. So what I'm asking everyone is to please, because once again, we're not allowed to spend much money on this contest, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, your relatives, people in your family, talk to people in your churches. Let them know about the dangers of not getting involved. As I've said before, repeatedly, politics has no business in the church, no place in the church at all. But the church has every business being involved in politics and in every other facet of society. So please, make the case to your pastors, and if not them, everybody knows who the conservatives are in their church. Would you please ask them to take out a membership? Please don't leave before you get a RAP card. It's got my personal cell phone and my personal email address on there. I've had that cell phone number for almost 30 years. I don't want to change it. I have no intention of changing it. It's part of holding me accountable if I actually win this thing. But the point being, you can tell any of your friends what you've heard today, and they can feel free to give me a call anytime. I'd be happy to answer their questions. I've taken considerable time off to be able to do exactly this for the past year, to have conversations like this with you when I'm not busy knocking on doors. So that's my great request of everyone here. Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it, and we will end up doing a Q&A session if anyone's got questions. Thank you very much.